All right, we've reached that time. Let's go ahead and get started here. I'll be hearing for interseeding cover crops and corn. We got Hadfield and Mike Pace here from the USU Extension. Here to give their presentation, so go ahead and turn the time over to you guys.
How do we decide? I mean, how many people we got in the room? I was just going to say, we can just test it out. Yeah. No, we'll give a bag of seed to the other one, right? So. COVID, yeah. Yeah, but he's doing okay. He's doing okay. It was more of his family got it, so he kind of was quarantined with them, so. Anyway, we'll get going here, and, we'll move through this. If you guys have any questions, please just stop us and ask us, because we'd rather have this be a discussion rather than us just talking today. So please, just, jump in wherever, we'll try and move through this. I know this is the last presentation of the day, so, if we get done early, we get done early. So that's how I feel about meetings and stuff. So thanks, Jace, for the introduction. This is me and Mike Pace. We're in Cache and Box Elder counties. We both work as the Ag Extension faculty in those counties. And so, anyway, just to start us out, to kind of introduce this project, and we're lucky enough to have a member of the North Cache Conservation District with us, actually the chair, Terry Backman over here, looking around. This is really where this project started, is because, these guys in this conservation district got interseed, and were able to interseed the corn, interseed cover crops into corn. And so they started doing this ahead of schedule, and, really kind of coming from my extension side, really I'm kind of coming on their coattails, and they just were like, well, let's see some numbers. Let's see what kind of numbers we're going to get from this. And so that's really where we kind of came in here, is kind of following behind their lead and running into this to see what kind of numbers we can see. So anyway, just a brief introduction there. Mike, I'll let you talk about some of the research.
If you look at cover crops and where they're doing the research in that, you'll notice a lot of it is being done in the eastern states. Very little of that is out here in the west. Just showing you, they've done a lot with some of their interseeders in that. On the right-hand side right here. And then you'll see this is one that's more like what you're seeing in here. It looks like a no-till drill, that they've taken out some of the openers in the center of those areas that's going to go over the corn and adapted it to be able to seed in that with a lot of the research. This is just kind of a map showing you where that research has been done. If you do a quick search as well and say, okay, what are they doing here in the west? And you'll see that there's not a lot. And so that's where we decided, Utah State, we have the conservation districts that were asking us questions about interseeding, cover crops into corn, and we just didn't have a good answer. And so we looked at what they were doing in the eastern states and trying to do some of that here. So we have numbers here for Utah. Oops.
Sorry, we're fighting over it with our things. So, and one of the things we want to say with that is, just because they've done research over in the east doesn't mean it won't work over here. The real reason is we just want to look at the differences, because there are differences if you look at our two climates. And I think that's an important part that we just look at. We want to make sure we understand what those differences are. And so we kind of just highlighted some of the big differences. 30 to 50 inches precip in the eastern states, where we get 16 to 20. And really the main thing to highlight here is how much precip we get in May. There's quite a bit of difference there. You can see there's differences in soil pH, as we all know. Differences in growing season. Now, 110 frost-free days, you're not going to be growing corn anyway, because that's going to be, Rich County or somewhere like that. But, there is differences that you can acknowledge there. Humidity, temperatures are relatively the same. But last but not least, and kind of one of the important parts is, talking about the water differences. There's rain-fed system that we see in the east. However, over here, what we're doing is we're doing sprinkler and flood irrigating, really, to make sure our corn grows full season. And so to get started, what we initially did is we wanted to create some research plots, and we were able to do this by working with cooperating growers. So we were able to get growers in 5 different counties, and we actually were able to create 8 different research plots across these 5 different counties. And the counties that we chose really are some of the main corn-producing counties in the state. We have Cache, Box Elder, Weber, Millard, and Sevier. And so just to give you an idea where these research plots are occurring and kind of where we had plots this last year.
Just to give you a better idea of what our research plots look like, this is what the field looks like. If you notice over here on the right, you can see our treatments were anywhere from our control, where we put no cover crops in at all, and then we came in and we interseeded at V2, V4, V6, 8, and up to V10. And Jake's going to explain to you what that means here in a second, but the idea is that, you know, when you go out and you lay it out in the field, you can see that those plots are 15 feet wide by 30 feet long. This would be our control plot right here. Over to this side would have been our V4, and then back here would be a V6, and so forth and so on to the north or to the west in that area. And so that kind of gives you an idea of what the plot would look like in each of those different areas. So, you know, 5 different counties, 8 different fields that we're doing this on. And realizing that we're going to come back in each one of these, so one day we're going to come in and just put the V2 in here, and then we're going to come back several days later, and we're going to come back and put it in, or come back, put the V8 in. So there's quite a bit of travel time and that coordination that's to do that, make that work.
Yes. Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little more in depth. So as you can see, the way we had this set up, the reason we did this is we wanted a lot of reps. We wanted a lot of data that we could take. Now, can you imagine us coming in here when that corn's at V10, which if you imagine V10, how tall is that, Mike? Yeah, we were up above. So V10, can you imagine us bringing an interseeder in there and trying to maneuver it to fit those plots? And that's kind of why we had to switch gears a little bit and change our method. And so what we did is we got this interseeder over here. And basically what we were able to do is we were able to calibrate this interseeder to drop 18 pounds per acre of seed, and we did it in 2 rows, just like what the regular interseeder does, except we had to go down each row. So it did take us some more time, but it allowed us to have these smaller plots and allowed us to have a lot more of these reps. And I wish our videos worked, because Mike is up there. He's describing it in a video, but they're not working today. And so anyway, this interseeder allowed us to use these small plots, be able to kind of develop these reps and kind of help us to get started on this project.
As a lot of the presentations you've heard, you know, the idea is that you're looking at putting in, you know, 6-way, 12-way different type mixes. This is one that we used in ours that was developed by the Cache County Conservation District there. And so what we have in here is we've got, you know, 3 different types of brassicas. We've got some broadleaf, we've got some grasses, we've got some legumes. You know, so most of it's, you know, you've got over almost 34% of it is legume fixation that's going on there for us. And the idea is that hopefully if some of them don't work, others will, and you get a cover crop that establishes in there. One of the things that we want to point out here is if you look at the mix that they're passing around and you're seeing, but you've got small seeds, you've got larger seeds, and you've got some kind of in between that. And one of the things that we noticed, it was kind of difficult to be able to seed that at the proper seeding depth. You know, if you're going to, small seeds probably should have been in around that 1/8 of an inch, whereas some of the other stuff should have been down probably deeper in that 1/2 inch range. And so, you know, when that, where do you decide that you're going to put that at? And so this little research planter that we had here kind of helped us with that, and we seeded at about 18 pounds to the acre with our cover crop mix.
days. But what he said is like, you just see you can open up, what do you think about that?
Well, and I think we've talked about that a little. So now we did with this little interseeder, we tried to mimic because Cache County has a commercial interseeder, and we tried to mimic that as close as possible. And so we actually, now, and Terry, you can correct me, but we did keep it at that shallow range. Isn't that correct? We kind of were looking, and that's where we kept this as well, as we kept it at that shallow. Now, we in our last one, we were talking with, what's his first name, McMurdy? Braden McMurdy, he was telling us that same thing, where he's like, you put the big seeds in and the small seeds will come up with it. And so I do think that works, but I mean, we've seen great success in Cache County with that. You know, a lot of the commercial interseeded plots, they had great, I mean, we saw a lot of variety, a lot of difference in just even going in that shallow depth. And so, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Terry, do you want to say something? Yeah, and I'll actually, if we go back, so some of the stuff we noticed, so specifically, we saw a lot of radish, we saw some of the kale, we saw turnip. In some plots, we saw buckwheat. We didn't see it in all of them. We did see it in some. Yellow mustard, we didn't see a lot. And I don't know what happened here, and this is my fault. In translation, there's supposed to be an Italian ryegrass in here, and we didn't put anything. But, and Terry, I think you can attest to this, but we didn't see any Italian ryegrass during the growing season. However, when we took the corn off, that Italian ryegrass came out of nowhere and was just right there. And I mean, it grew like crazy. Hairy vetch, we did see some. I only saw 1 or 2 red clover plants, and that was in Severe. I actually didn't see much of it. Did you see any on yours, Terry? Red clover? I didn't see that, and I didn't see any brown flax. Is this similar to what you saw, Terry, or did you see some differences? Yeah. And that's kind of what we saw.
Maybe not so much ryegrass, maybe you've got an old or a triticale or something like that you're putting in there, and then the hairy vetch has done very well. Yeah, maybe we tweak those seed mixes a little bit for us.
According to the thought, I think we need to get our seed supplier to look at these plots and justify the expense we've had in each one of these categories.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. The brown flax or the red clover, right? Yep. Yeah. No, I think that's a good point, because one of the things that we've been seeing in some of the new research that's coming out is they've also been trying to simplify the crop mixes, and in fact, they're even recommending like going all broadleaf so that you can control, either go all broadleaf or go all grass in your cover crop mix when you're interseeding. So that's just an interesting way to look at it, kind of some new things. And did you have a comment?
Yeah, were all of these test plots, they're obviously all over the state, but were they kind of similar to the practices prior?
Well, there was some variability. Now, we tried to keep it pretty, but I mean, it really was all up to the grower. The grower kind of ran that. And so I will tell you, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but like there was flood and there was pivot. So already that's a huge difference between the two. So it's hard to compare those. I mean, that's a little bit of apples and oranges when you're really looking at it closely. So there are variability between the plots overall. And in fact, one plot was non-GMO, and so it was vastly different than the others. So silage. And we had one plot that was actually grain, but we took it at silage time rather than, because they changed their mind halfway through, so we just took it at silage time. So just to describe our treatments real quick, kind of what we're looking at. So we're looking at the different growth stages in corn, and so we call them V stages or vegetative stages. And just so you know what that is basically the V stage is how many leaf collars have been exposed. So if you look at this plant over here, you can see we got 1, 2, 3, potentially 4. So that's going to be a like 3 to 4 V stage at that point. Now, it's kind of hard to say, oh, well, this field is V2, because if you walk through a field, you'll see V2, V3, you know. We actually had a field that I walked in and I had V2 and I also had V6 the same day. So that's kind of tricky, and that's one of the things we ran into, is that sometimes you can have variability in the consistency there. So
It's mainly because we're so dry this spring, we didn't have moisture. Typically, you would have, good moisture there, put the corn on the ground, all comes up together. So because we're drier, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And just to mention with this real quick, so this is just some of the stuff we saw. This was an earlier planted. I think this was either V2. I think this here was V4 when it was planted. But you can see we started to see cover crop early on. We kind of started to see it when it was coming up and whatnot.
The whole idea behind this research project is we wanted to look at over time, what is soils, are we improving them, are we getting better soil health in there, are we getting aggregation in there. The other thing we wanted to look at is, how does putting a cover crop in there affect our yields on our crops? And that's why we had that control where we didn't put anything in, and we put it in at V2, thinking that, okay, most of us know that any early weed competition is going to affect our yields on our crops. So we wanted to be able to show that, oh yeah, it does, or verify that. V4 to V6 is typically what research is telling us we need to be putting cover crops in, is that V4 to V6 stage. Then a V8 stage is going to be, V8, V10 is going to be way too late. You're going to have that canopy that's closing up, and those plants are not going to be able to germinate and get up enough to where they can sit there and kind of go in maintain that vegetative state to where you come in the fall time of the year and harvest the corn off, and then they're going to start growing again. And so we wanted to see that range and how that affects it, and verify what research from the east is showing here in Utah. And then the last thing we wanted to do is be able to share the results. There's a lot of uncertainty, and we're all learning. I think if you've gone to some of the workshops here today and yesterday, you're seeing that we're learning. Everybody's talking about some of the mistakes and that they've learned from, and how they've used that to better what they're doing now with it. And that's the same thing. We want to be able to verify that.
So now, one of the things we want to point out, so in a regular year, right here I have our average precept. This is mainly in Utah, across the state. We kind of go through these regular swings, and this is where we really are different from the east is, June, July, and August, we hardly get any rain. We do get some storms, but overall it's kind of a low time. Now, if we look at last year, and this is kind of where some of our issues came in with our research plots, if you look at our May, you can see how low our precip was last year. And this is Cache County specifically, but this was across the state. We had hardly any rain in that month. And so what we saw when we were in our research plots is we saw that in a lot of our V2, which we go in about June 1st-ish is about when we were really hitting V2. When we go in with V2, about June 7th, so not even a week later, we were going in V4. But between that time, a lot of guys didn't even have an irrigation turn. And so that cover crop just sat in the soil. It didn't germinate because there was no water there. And when we're planting in a shallow base, there's not a lot of water that's going to be available. And so really some of our results are going to be kind of not correct because some of these were growing at V4 rather than starting at V2. just because they didn't have the water to grow. And that's kind of one of the things we saw with the year effect, is that really it was hard to keep these growing at the right V stage or the right vegetative stage. And one thing to mention with that, so, you know, with our V2 and V4, we had issues with it, but if a producer was waiting and like was going to put a commercial interseeder in, a lot of them are going to fall that right with water. That makes all the difference in the world. But for us, where we're coming into their field every, 3 to 6 days, how can they irrigate that often? It's just not a possibility. And so that's where this research kind of ran into some, hiccups you can look at.
Yeah, ideally, what we would like to have said was been out on a pivot or a linear and says, hey, we're gonna come in and we're gonna put that V2 stage in today, and can you put a half an inch of moisture on it? And then we're gonna be in 5 more days, and can you put a half an inch of moisture? Wouldn't have been great to have said that, but it didn't. We followed what Mother Nature provided, and then when that grower decided to irrigate, and some of those we had to, kind of move it around. The next thing we had was herbicides. Most of you know that with corn, most of us the growers are growing Roundup Ready corn, and so if you're going to be putting it out there, when those weeds are in that 2 to 40 stage right here, you can see that corn is probably in that V3, V4 stage right there. A lot of us are using a residual herbicide as well to try and get some weed control later on in the year, and those same weed control is going to affect our cover crops. And so now all of a sudden you have to look at how you're going to manage those weeds based upon those cover crops that you're going to try and establish with that. And I got some pictures I'll show you a little bit later on showing those weeds and what happens when you're just relying upon a Roundup and you don't have a very clean field, or you think you got a clean field, and all of a sudden you find out later it's not as clean as you thought.
And we already mentioned this a little bit, but talking about cultivation, because, we go into this plot here. This is our field in Weber County. This is down in Ogden. And you can see, we planted this plot here. But however, if you look at kind of what happened later, and so what this producer did is he kind of did every other row. That's the way he went with his furrows. But you can see, so we planted that V2 there, but there's not much cover crop that's going to come up there because they came through and furrow irrigated. Now, I will tell you, we are actually talking with, I don't know if you guys have been able to see the interseeder in the event center, but we were actually talking with, is it Blackfish? Kyle. And he was telling us over in Box Elder, because they do a lot of flood irrigating there, what they're actually going to try and do is get shovels on the front of their interseeder so that they come through in their furrow. They're basically creating their furrows as they're planting that cover crop, which is a no-brainer. I mean, make one pass and do both jobs at once. That's pretty awesome if you can pull that off and make that work. But this is another issue. So I will tell you, we had some plots up north that were pivot, but vast majority across the rest of the state were flood. Yeah, in fact, they all were flood now that I'm thinking about it. So anyway, just to give you a heads up there.
So just to kind of show you, this is when we were looking at planting. This was up in Cache County, and you can see that we were coming in at V2. We were seeding on the 4th of June. 3 days later, we come back and put it in for V4 stage, and you can see clear down. So that from the time we started until the time we were putting it in at V10 was 26 days. And this is this you and I, Jake? I can't remember. Anyway, that's the cedar. That's V10 right there, and you're trying to lift that up. So you can imagine if we would have tried to do this research with a tractor, and how much corn we would have been knocking it over. So that's one of the problems that we had or one of the concerns we have is how do you establish those plots with a planter like we've got out there.
And this is for one plot, remember? So
yeah.
Trying to manage 8 of these different plots. So you can imagine we're just running around. Like I felt like a chicken running around because I just was trying to balance it, do whatever, but we were just going all over the place.
Yeah, some days we were planting 3 or 4 different plots in one day to get those in.
Yeah, I'll talk about harvesting. So we had a good video here that actually showed our harvest process, but to just kind of give you a heads up, so like we talked about, we had those plots, and what we did in each one of those plots is we took the 2 middle corn rows, so there were 6 total corn rows within that 15-foot by 30-foot row, and we took those 2 middle corn rows and went right in the middle and took a 10-foot section. We had a machete, cut those out, and we weighed them right then and there. That was how we could determine our yield, just right off the bat right there. And so that's what I'm trying to show you here in this video that didn't work for some reason. But basically, we're weighing those as we're going through. Now, it didn't work in this morning at all, so try clicking on it. If it works now, I'll be mad. What was that? Yeah, so I don't think it's going to work, but anyway, we're good. So, and then as we're going through there, we took out that 10-foot section. What we'd do is we'd grab 3 random stalks from each plot, and what we'd do is we'd actually take them. Oh, no, I'm not on it. Hold on. Oh, there we go. So, and then what we do is we'd actually send them through a chipper, and what we were doing is collecting these for a lab analysis so that we could be able to look at some of the nutrition parameters on them. Now, for those of you who buy silage, you know that we're really looking for bulk. We're not really looking at nutrition. Nutrition doesn't have an impact, but we thought we'd take a look at it and see what happens anyway. So,
The other thing that we've got to mention was when we did the harvesting in that, we also looked at plant populations and recorded that for each one of the plots with each one of the different fields there, so that we had an idea as in the end what we were harvesting out of those plots. So, after you've harvested the plots, this is what you'd like to be able to look down and see. This is one of the fields that was commercially seeded. And if you look down there, you can see there's a wide variety. You see some of the grasses that are there. You can see some of the kales and some of the brassicas. There might be some, but really a nice job in that. And that's, a nice commercially seeded field right there in Cache County. Just showing you again, this is one of the commercial seeded fields in Cache. And if you look, you've got probably 2.5 feet of cover crop that's growing up in there. I will point out in this particular field, we were down to about 24.5 thousand plants per acre. Typical seeding rates for silage corn is probably going to be in that 37,000 plants. And the idea is that you're trying to keep that cover crop, give it enough sunlight so that it can continue to grow into the fall time of the year. So they come in and taking that out. You see they've left quite a bit of it right there so that it can regrow. Kind of point this out. Notice this picture right here on the left. You can see that this is a skip or something that's happened right there that's allowed that that cover crop to grow and be able to get that moisture and sunlight in here, and it looks really good. And a lot of the ones that we were seeing, and this is not, this is earlier on, this is probably about that V10 stage of corn growth, and is not fully covered over right there. But again, you can kind of see that, this does not look like that, okay? And we wish we would have had it all looking, if it all would look like that, great. Yeah, probably, it didn't germinate because we were dry. With that, probably didn't have, and then like I said, that corn grew quite quickly. Once it did get some moisture on it, grew quite quickly and covered it over.
Yeah, we do think, because every spot where there was a miss corn-wise, if you look, every spot, there usually that overtaken had just come up and grown great. Where it was more shaded, we didn't really see that a lot of.
So I think no, nope.
No, it would have been.
No, this is going to be a later. This is harvest time.
This is harvest. This is probably only D10. So this is what it looked like at harvest though still.
Yeah, we just did not see it in those ones that we were harvesting.
Well, and I will tell you on our field in Weber, one of the things we saw in Weber is we actually had a picture where a lot of the cover crop was actually not looking this dense, but it looked really good. By the time we got there, the cover crop had actually gotten really spindly and kind of really just went down. And I think it's partially because one of the things they talk about is that cover crop is supposed to go dormant, and I think it went dormant, and so it really kind of went down and there wasn't as much. Terry?
I had a field, a 40-acre field that I thought that I interseeded right this time. I finally got it right. We chopped the corn off and I was so disappointed. When I caught there, the crop didn't look like I had much there at all. Some things didn't look like anything. That picture on the right looks like one of those tracks where my lateral wheels went actually. Anyway, long and short, got the corn chopped off, got rid of it. 6 weeks, 2 months later, the cover crop was blanket across the field like carpet to my knees.
Terry, did you water that after you harvested the corn?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
I had a lateral there, and we needed to give it some water. Find some things that.
Yeah.
Good water.
Flu season seeds, right? There's a hole in snow or something, and do not come out, and then by the next spring, it may be out.
Yeah. Well, and I mentioned that with the Italian ryegrass because we didn't see hardly any Italian ryegrass in any of our plots. But if we went back to a couple of them and really it came out in droves after that. Yeah. You can see. Yeah, no, and that's exactly it. And I think that's the important part is, and that's why we wanted to come back later. The hard part we had though is we've got, a bunch of different growers, and those growers all have different plans after they're done. For instance, in Weber, they're putting it back into the soil. So we didn't really have, we couldn't come back 15 days later. Whereas other people are grazing it, and so we can, but that's one aspect of it that we're trying to work out a little bit better. What time is it? How much time we got? Tilts, yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. So next what we did is we prepared the samples. So what we did is we went to the USU Analytical Lab and we actually ran the samples ourselves. So we ground them down, ran them through, what is it called? Why can't I remember? NIR, and ran them through there. And so here are some of the results. And so one of the things I want to say before we get going into this is our corn yield. This is yield tons per acre. And so you can see here, we kind of got it set up. And now it looks like there's some differences here. But one of the things I wanted to say is across the study, what we saw when we put these numbers, when we ran them through statistical analysis and everything, we really found no differences in yield across the board. We really didn't see any difference from the control, V2, V4, V6, V8, V10, any of that. And so anyway, but we wanted to put the numbers up here, show you what we got. So for instance, we got box elder. This is severe east. So this is the mean data. And so what we had to do, we couldn't really combine fields because if you look, there's a huge difference between just box elder and severe. So we couldn't really combine fields together, and so we had to run them individually as each field because really the data was just kind of all over. Yeah, and so we didn't see any differences compared in each individual field, if that makes sense. And so, I mean, you can look at the numbers here, and it may look like this is a lot higher, but really there isn't a lot of difference if you look at the scale there and kind of how the differences are and whatnot. Yes, correct, Mike? Yeah. And so Weber, and so anyway, that's some examples. And so cash was a little different. The plot we did there was only control verse 6. And so there were some differences there and whatnot. Now, I will tell you that we did find some differences when we looked at nutritional parameters. Again, I know that this isn't really you're not buying based on nutrition and silage. But we did see that our planting at our V6 stage compared to control, the ADF was higher when we planted at V6. Same here with the severe. ADF was higher at 2, 6, 8, and 10, where it was lower at the control in 4. Yeah. Yes, sorry. Yes, I need to say that. We want, sorry, and I'm this is where I focus. I love nutrition. Anyway, but ADF, we want a lower number. A lower number equals more digestible for the animal. And so we want a lower number, and we can see our control and our V4 really had those lower numbers. And the funny part is if you watch this, it's going to be the same fields. Now, the important part to mention with this is this would only happen in 2 fields. It didn't happen in any of the other plots. So who knows how much of a actual difference this makes. So it's acid detergent fiber is what it's called. But basically what it's saying is how digestible it is for the ruminant. It's actually going to be the same. NDF, you're going to be looking for the same thing. It's neutral detergent fiber. It's just basically saying how digestible it is. Lower number is better. And you'll just see that the treatments, you can see they kind of follow that same trend. Now when I switch to this next one, TDN, you're going to flip it. So total digestible nutrient, you're going to flip it over, and you just see this is going to be the same because ADF calculate this. But these were all differences that we saw. And so just wanted to throw those out there just to kind of look at them and whatnot.
So just kind of want to show you what the fields look like post-harvest. Here's what it looked like before, and there again, as you can see that cover crop up in there, not a lot of competition from the corn row that was taken out there. This is shortly after that. Notice that we've got good cover crop establishment in those rows. One of the things that you'll notice is where you're driving machinery and stuff, it does knock a lot of that down and does some damage there. With those, just here's kind of a close-up. You can see a good range of the different plants in there. Again, here's where you've driven the tire tracks right there. Usually it pops back, but it takes a lot more time to pop back. This is the fields that right after harvest, within 2 days, they came back with an irrigation and threw some water on it. This was taken 10 days later, wasn't it?
Yeah.
After harvest. Yeah.
And the previous picture here, or these pictures here were taken the
Day after harvest.
September 20th.
Yeah.
A little bit later than that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you can see, really that little bit of precip that you gave that really helped that come back. And you're thinking if you're either using that for livestock or just trying to grow biomass that you're going to leave there over the winter time and then come back in the springtime, you're doing a great job with that. In reverse, here's another commercial field that was out there. Again, that's pretty dry. It would have helped to have put, some moisture on that to get those plants to come back, but they didn't, and so it just kind of sat there.
And then if that's what bounced back. Yes. Okay, so that's that field.
Trucks and choppers, it was a blanket behind. But you keep track of three row, four chopper versus the south of Alabama, that 12 row.
What did you use there?
That field there was sold to my neighbor, and he's running a row. 2 miles up the hill,
Harvester.
10-liter.
Where this field here was a pull behind. It was it's either it might be 2 or 3.
I don't think it was two or three row harvester.
I believe they're
3 row.
Well,
Yeah.
and I will tell you.
Yeah, following the truck. Yeah, and so that's why I kind of showed you this. You can see there's a lot of tire tracks that go down through there. That if you had a bigger piece of equipment going down through there, a lot less damage done to that cover crop. But it's good to hear too that given some time, given some of that fall rain that we really eventually did get in Cache Valley, that came back for you.
And the 3 row that was used on that. So when they first started, that was getting gummed up because it was a little bit hard to get through at first. They got it going and they got it running smooth. I think they got the RPMs right or something. I don't know, but it took them a minute to get into that field when they were doing the head rows and whatnot. So, yep. So it was getting a little bit clogged and whatnot. So. And so, just some of the things we were able to do, we kind of do field days. So across the state in these different areas, we try and show these at our field days. So if you guys are in Sevier, Millard, Weber, Box Elder, we do try and show these plots if we can, Cache as well. But you can see here, this is some of the stuff we saw. I mean, look at this turnip, look at this radish here. I mean, you can see how big some of that stuff ends up getting and how much that can provide, how much biomass, as well as how much aeration, relieving compaction, whatnot. There's a lot there that can really, really help overall. So I'll let you talk about this, Mike.
So this was the field we had over in Box Elder County that was on a pivot. When we first went out there and looked at this field and the grower told us we could use this, I'm sitting there thinking, man, this is going to be sweet. We're going to have some good yields. I mean, it was prepped good, looked really nice. We went out there and started, put our V2 stage in, and, there wasn't any moisture in the field, and got our V4, and at that V4 stage, he done a quick pass across it because he noticed his corn wasn't coming up. He said, I'll give it a jump start and get it, and we're like, great, it's going to look good. Did that, didn't come. Put V6 in, we kept on going with it, and we just had a hard time getting it established and getting anything to come up in there. And one of the things we noticed that this particular field was pumping a little bit more salts when we finally looked at it. Rick, this is out in Bothwell, and you know what's out there. But the thing I want to point out here is the effect of herbicides and using some of those herbicides in here. So if you look down here in this picture, you can almost see right to the line right here. This is where he put, Roundup out there with, I'm not sure what chemical, to give him some post control, and it worked. He sprayed it at plant after it had come up. He sprayed the Roundup, and then with that Roundup, he had some post emergence to control some of the weeds as well. I'm not sure what it was. I'd have to go back and ask him. But the idea is that, here's what it looked like out in the field, very clean. We could see right to the rows right there as to where our plot started, because I told him, don't spray in there. I'll spray the Roundup. I'll come back and hand weed it to keep your weeds out. Well, this is what it looked like after I had sprayed Roundup, after I did hand control come fall time of the year. I forgot that it was even out there, and it was a mess. And so, hats off to those chemicals that we use to help us control our weeds in our corn, because it was obvious as to how well they worked for us in that field right there. The data was horrible because we were pulling some salts. That salt was actually burning, our cover crops, and it was a mess. And here all along, we thought it was going to be one of the best.
Well, and one thing I wanted to say is that wasn't the only plot that we had issues. In Millard County, the dairy down there that allowed us on their fields and whatnot, they can't use GMO corn. And so Roundup wasn't an option. And I will tell you, that plot we couldn't take any data from. It just was a battle because everything that they used had residual. And so there was just no way that we could even get cover crop in there and whatnot. So anyway, just wanted to point that out. Now, just to kind of go with plans for 2022, kind of what we're looking at. So I'll tell you, we did this data, and again, you've seen the results. The results have kind of been, there wasn't really a yield change or whatnot, but some of the things that me and Mike and our team has learned through this, and a lot of people might say, well, we already knew that, but we really learned that if you look at it just from a management perspective as a grower, it really makes sense to hit that V4 to V6 window. Because I'll tell you, if you're trying to hit V2, that's before you can spray any herbicides, that's before you can do anything. Whereas if you get to your V4, V6 stages, that's really when you have had a chance to spray some herbicides to really get the weeds down. Because I will tell you, that was all year we fought weeds. I mean, that was huge. And, a lot of people some people have mentioned to us cover crops will fight weeds, but it's hard when the weeds are beating you to it and getting there. And so anyway, that's really, from what our research, we really gathered that V4 to V6 stage is where the grower, like for a grower, I think, and Terry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's the prime time, as well as it's the prime time for the cover crop, you know?
It is exactly the prime time, but you've got maybe a week.
Yeah.
V2 to V6.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now, in that stage of growth and the heat, moist, you simply can't do it.
And
Especially if you're sharing the, grill between the conservation district.
Yeah.
And you're putting in maybe 300 acres, that means 3 of you are going to borrow.
yeah, because I mean, really, the limit's time. It's not the itself. I mean, because our interseeder, it's planned beforehand. It's planned before those weeks because it's got to be moving. And some of the stuff that I like that you guys have done is you keep it on the same tractor. You don't let it switch, because once it's calibrated, you want that thing in the ground running the whole time. Because, I mean, you're basically racing, because that V6, and usually the V4 to V6 is when the heat of the summer hits, and that corn's not waiting for anybody. It's just going to keep growing and keep going. So,
I think we did, and honestly, we did it kind of by accident, but it worked so well, is the dealers in our valley are taking turns putting one of their tractors on that as a demo for that 3 weeks that it's using. And that's it for the third dealer. So like you say, that tractor gets on there and calibrated, and as it goes from me to you, we drive it to you and you get on it in no time.
yeah,
We keep-
yeah.
we keep- That's the seed, that's the uniform seed that all the growers use. So we put flushing seeds in the tank, seed box, we put a lid on top, put it in. One thing we have requested is this, in my place, in your place, so in my place with full tank of seed.
Yeah.
In your place with full tank. And boy, we can.
And it moves, huh? It moves. Yeah, and it moves quick. Like you get through that interseeding pretty quick overall, and get place to place. So, and actually this year, that's what I kind of want to bring up for our plans for this next year. So because we've learned these things, we actually, that V4 to V6 window is prime. So we're actually going to take a little bit of a different approach in the fact that we are going to try and follow the interseeders in each of our counties. Luckily now, last year it's only available in Cache, but right now they actually have it available in Box Elder as well as Sevier County. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try and be there with the interseeder, and what we want to look at is we're actually going to look at a difference in corn population. We want to see what happens if you kind of lessen that corn population, and we need to work with growers. I actually haven't even told Terry this yet, but we kind of want to go with a lower rate on corn and then go with a higher rate to see how that affects the cover crop. Because that lower rate, again, when we saw a lower rate, we did see higher cover crop overall. And so that's one of the biggest things that we want to look at, see how much of a difference that can make, and also compare that with controls to see, in places where it's not interseeded, to really see what differences.
So the trade-off between the shade and the sunlight, right?
Uh-huh. Yes.
What shade you provide, almost sun, the both.
Yeah. And
The other thing we're gonna have to do is, because we're gonna use the commercial planters, is we're gonna have, instead of small plots, we're gonna have strips through the field that then we go into, say, like, here's a plot now, with some, can't be able to move that thing in between them.
well, and I think what we're gonna try and do is just follow that interseeder. When it's moving, we're just, you know what I mean, to make sure those plots get lined out, and that's something we'll be working with the conservation districts on to make sure it happens and whatnot. So anyway, that's kind of what we got for plans for our next year. Here's some acknowledgments. I won't go through it because I think we're up.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
But you didn't try interseeding soybeans.
We have not tried soybeans.
There are some crossover chemicals between corn and soybeans. Optional, not gonna, the other question I have for Dave is if they're not buying corn solids for nutritional value, where they're buying solids.
Okay, that's fair. I'm with you on that. 100%.
I've had the privilege of working with Dave and Terry
Huh. Okay. Well, I need to be careful what I say there then. I need to be careful what I say. The way I looked at it is a lot of people, they just buy it based on the bulk. Yeah, but no, that's a good point. Yeah.
So, let me address the question you had on the soybean and that. I haven't seen much, but didn't we have somebody come up here today that said they didn't?
Joe, so did you go to Joe Can's? Joe Can has done it. And I don't know if you saw his. He actually planted it. He said he had to get away from it, though, because he had to go away from GMOs, I think. But he did it, and he saw success with it because he had inoculate that soybean seed to get the nodules on it. Doing that. Yeah. No. Awesome.
And then the other crop came also. But where I was broadcasting, I didn't try to figure out the seed on top of
That's the thing, it's been great to be here today, is to be able to learn what other you guys have been doing on that. Because I think there's a lot of good knowledge.
But in the future, with an option, I will just do one spray right in emergence. But like with a few of these little come on, you can just do a little higher.
Yeah.
I think, getting on that box right there.
Is that, if you've got, like pigweed, we saw a lot of red root pigweed in some of those plots and that. I'm just thinking, okay, maybe what we ought to do is tell that grower, we're going to just go to a grass, a triticale or Italian ryegrass or whatever. I think the radishes and the turnips can tolerate some of those sprays. Put that in as our cover crop and then spray more of a broadleaf in there to control that red root pigweed and some of those type of things. And have good success with it. Or just the reverse of that, if you got a grass problem, Johnson grass or wire grass or something like that, do more of the broadleaves, the legumes and some of those and try and control your grasses and things like that with it. But it's all, there's so much knowledge in that trial and error. I think, if you haven't done it, put, 10, 20 acres in and see what you learn from it.
We're hoping to share this when we do field days and whatnot, but we're also hoping that we can continue to, be at the soil health things and just continue to share that. We're working very closely with NRCS and the conservation districts as well. So even maybe at the conservation district meetings, we really want to make sure, because honestly, the reason we're doing this is because we're doing it purely just to be able to share this information. Summit County. Okay, yeah. Terry?
I haven't said anything to you yet, but next year at the state conservation district convention, I would like to see this presentation done at one of the breakout sessions in that conference, so that can also be available
Off that, yeah. Yeah, and I will say, this just came to my memory here, and again, we're getting up close on time here, but we actually had a guy, he's from the NRCS, I can't remember his name, he's out in the basin, but one of the things he was telling us today, so they did some of this in grain corn. We weren't involved with them because it kind of got weird with the drought and stuff and whatnot, but he was telling us that he had a guy that was able to put 600 head on 125 acres, and he did it for, do you remember how many days? I mean, it was through November he had them on there. I can't remember right now, but he was telling us that it was huge, the savings he saw, and this is out in the basin, so I mean, you know, out there in kind of that country, and so there is a lot of this. We're hoping to incorporate them in. Again, that's grain corn though. One thing I will say with grain corn, hairy vetch can be a nightmare because Joe Can actually talked about this. No, it wasn't Joe Can. It was McMurdy. He mentioned that his rollers and his combine, it would get tied up with hairy vetch. So that's a heads up. Like, be careful with hairy vetch because it'll climb right up your corn stalks. So anyway, any other questions that we can answer? Comments even, yeah.
Don't plant cover crop on steep side hills that you're in. Try to pull the shrub. It does not work. Seriously. That cover crop is so snotty slick, you can't get a 10 to climb it.
Is that on your piece down there, down by the, on the end? Yep. Yeah, I know right where you're at on that one, so. Yep, go ahead and take that. You can take that. So if you have any other questions, please reach out to us. We're happy to help with anything, so.